every form of plastics that we have are oil-based. So if we were to begin to strip out of this room everything in it that was oil-based, then the microphones, the casing for the camera, the chairs that you're sitting on would begin to vanish from the room because ultimately they have the platform on which they are produced in the oil industry. So it is the commodity of modern capitalism. I want to add a little bit generally about the relationship, though, between oil and geopolitics, because it's not true that everywhere where there is oil, there is conflict. This is not the case. Just the existence of oil resources won't get you to an explanation of why there are conflicts in particular areas of the world. There is not going to be a war over North Sea oil. There is not going to be a war over the oil in the Alberta tar sands in Canada. There isn't, in any serious or foreseeable future, going to be a war over the oil supplies and the oil resources in Russia itself. Because on the one hand, in the North Sea and in Canada, these are deep inside the Western sphere of influence. There's no need for there to be a war over them. The West might like to conduct a war for Russian oil resources, but it can't because the scale of the conflict is simply too big to contemplate. So what we need to focus in on are those places in the world where the oil exists, where there's a geopolitical fracture in the system as well, where the tectonic plates of empire grind against one another and where the prize of oil is also present. If we begin to look at it as an interaction between this uniquely profitable resource and the places where there is the possibility of one power or another gaining access to it when it lies within the other camp at the moment, then we can begin to see where the conflicts might take place. There's also another problem. There's another issue involved here. You see, it's not just access to oil that matters, because commodities in this society aren't produced just because they're necessary, just because they're important to the economy. They are actually only produced when they are important and profitable to do so. And so how profitable the oil is in different parts of the world is very, very important as well. To get oil out of the tar sands of Alberta will cost you $6 to $8 a barrel. To get it out of the sand in Saudi Arabia will cost you $2 a barrel. So the profitability of Saudi oil, Middle Eastern oil generally, is out of all proportion greater than it is anywhere else in the world. And this is why the Middle East, above all others, is a centre of conflict about this resource. So if we begin to think about oil in this sense, of its relationship to existing geopolitical conflicts and the profitability of the sources of oil in these areas, then we can begin to construct a serious picture of where conflicts might take place. Now, I'm sure I'm going to tell you things that you already know about your own area of the world, so this won't be news to many of you, I'm sure. I suppose it might be of some gratification that right back as far as the anti-war movement, not over Afghanistan and Iraq, but there was an anti-war movement in Britain over the war in the Balkans and the breakup of Yugoslavia, many of the activists began looking at the relationship between the breakup of the Balkans, which was absolutely simultaneously almost to the week, well actually to the week, with NATO's expansion eastwards and towards the issue of who was going to have control of Caspian oil and who was going to be able to pump it west, because I think as Brzezinski once said, you can't carry it west in buckets. There's a pipeline politics that, as well as where the actual oil is pumped, and we know this not just in this part of the world, but in many other parts of the world as well. So I think it's important, therefore, to detail what is possible. In the early days, of course, there was talk that the oil resources in the Caspian would be as large as Saudi Arabia. Those estimates have been considerably revised. Now they're now reckoned to be on the scale, not of Saudi Arabia, but on the scale of the North Sea, which is very considerable. You know, this lifted the British economy for a generation. It's a considerable oil resource, but it's not on the scale of Saudi Arabia. But there is obviously a very, very serious presence of the international oil conglomerates in this part of the world. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline is a conglomerate of 11 of the world's biggest oil companies, and these are people who don't play at politics. They are the biggest corporations in the world. They have the backing of the biggest states in the world. I mean, directly, it used to be for people on the left and Marxists that we used to have to make an argument that there was a link between corporate power and government in democracies. When the Bush government came to power, the George W. Bush government in the United States, we ceased to have to make that argument. It wasn't that there was a link between the two. They were in government. Condoleezza Rice was from Exxon. Cheney was from Halliburton. George W. Bush himself was from an oil family. There wasn't a link, there wasn't influence, there wasn't pressure. They were there. They were holding the seats of government. But even in administrations which don't have oil corporations directly represented, the presence is obviously there. So we have, and I think that Caspian oil is one of those places where there is a cross-section of a geopolitical fissure in the system, a strategic fissure in the system, and the presence of oil. And I think that it wasn't the direct or immediate cause of the conflict in 2008, but I don't think that you have to have very much political imagination to see that this was certainly a factor in the calculations of the American administration. In fact, I would say the calculations in 2008 of the American administration and its involvement in this country were that this coincided, an oil question coincided with the strategic drive to the east of NATO, with the expansion of military bases by the United States around the whole periphery of Russia. If you take these elements together, I think you'll be a considerable period, a considerable distance down the road to an explanation of what was happening here. Of course, the other thing that will affect this is the price of oil. If the price of oil rises, then it becomes much more profitable to get oil out of even difficult places, even places where it's hard to pump the oil west than it would be otherwise. Obviously, oil price is low. You'll probably always be able to make a considerable profit out of Saudi oil. If the oil price rises, you can make profits, and indeed they have, out of oil from the Alberta tar sands or from places where you have to pump the oil a considerable distance to get it to market. So if we think about the intersection of these questions, of the geopolitical question, of the oil resource question, and of the price of oil, then we've got a kind of cartography of where conflicts are liable to emerge in my view.